All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. 24 runs in a single game, 37 runs in the weekend series. I think we can both agree that this Baltimore team probably isn't the best barometer exactly for where the Reds are right now, but what exactly did the Reds gain over the weekend at Camden Yards outside of a very needed series win against Baltimore?
When you talk to people about kind of the slow start to the season that the Reds lineup had, you hear a lot about missed opportunities and missed pitches and pressure and maybe a little confidence too. And at the end of the day, when the Reds got pitches down the middle in their zone, they had to hit it. And even leading up before the Sunday game, the Reds were doing a much better job of that. And then, of course, it exploded on Sunday, but how they viewed it was kind of a continuation of some adjustments that they really had been working on successfully over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it exploded, to say the least. It exploded to the tune of the 24 runs being that only once in the last 125 years had a Reds team scored more than they scored Sunday in Baltimore against the Orioles. That was the offense. That was the highlight. But you can also look at it this way. They entered that series with their top two rotation arms scheduled to throw. Nick Lodolo wasn't there for a very wonderful reason. Congratulations to Nick and the Lodolo family on the birth of Keaton Lodolo. And then Hunter Green, previously unhittable, has his first clunker in a couple of years and blew up the bullpen in the process. And still, with both of those things, they still found a way to win that series in Baltimore and maybe set themselves on a good course here at the start of a long road trip. Welcome into Power Stacks with Giesenslow and Goldsmith, proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. Coming up on the show today, who are these guys? That's the question. Reds president of baseball operations, Nick Krall, has thoughts on that as Chaz visited with Krall in Baltimore. Also, sifting through all of those gaudy offensive numbers we just talked about, what's the message from hitting coach Chris Valaika? He checks in on that. And speaking of messages, the messaging from the manager's office, what did Jake Fraley take from Terry Francona that meant something to Fraley and the start of his season? All that on the way on the show today, but we hit the leadoff spot with this question. After 20-plus games now, Chaz, what do we think we know about the 2025 Cincinnati Reds as that answer continues to evolve each and every game that they play?
Like you mentioned, you expected the starting staff to be what carried the Reds this weekend. It ended up being the offense. You look at the team as a whole, a theme has been actually dropping winnable games. You look at Saturday in Baltimore. You look at both of the losses to Seattle. You look at the series finale in San Francisco. But the Reds won't score. They won't, get 10 hits a game quite like they did in Baltimore. You are seeing signs offensively, and it feeds into, again, the word you used, identity. What kind of Nick Krall built this team hoping it would look like? I asked Nick Krall from a vision standpoint, is this group kind of playing the style of baseball in terms of what the strengths and weaknesses are that you expected? Here's what he had to say.
Obviously, we want a good starting staff that sets the tone for game, and then obviously you need the bullpen that's going to be able to shut it down. But, as a offensive profile, you want guys that are going to make high contact, especially in our ballpark. You make a lot of contact, you're going to pop a ball out of the park. Trying to just makes a lot more sense for us to live it there. If you can hit line drives and use the whole field, you're gonna be able to open up all of the score up.
I know it's very early, but when you look at the offense as a whole, do you look at it as, right, these are a lot of guys specifically in the bottom half of the order who have hit and pretty well some guys who have been strong related for points this season?
I mean, it was nice to get A's and McClain back the other day. Those are two guys that we have hitting the top and middle of the order that's make a huge difference to the order. So it slots everybody else in that order. So it's been really good to have those guys back. Obviously, your home run's going to score yourself every time, right? But at the same time, you want guys that can make quality contact, use the whole field, because you make quality contact in our ballpark, and a ballpark, so you're going to hit some home runs. So it's really important to just be a high quality contact team.
I spoke with Nick Krall on Friday, especially before the offensive explosion on Sunday when the bottom half of that order did, accomplish feats that we'd never seen before. But that message, quality, contact, overall power, kind of explained a lot of why the Reds offense was where it was, specifically how it felt entering that series. It felt like they were being maybe a bit too selective, but Krall said this is kind of the style we're going to stick with. It's just about individual guys making adjustments. And he said, Steer has hit, Candelario has hit. The guys in the bottom half, Jake Fraley, a perfect example, who now is getting really hot. Gavin Lux as well. Also specifically citing the return of McLean and then Hayes, who, wasn't expected to be the savior of this offense when they signed him, but might just be. All those timed together, like I said earlier, like some real positive signs of where this offense was trending even before they scored 24.
Yeah, and we know this. Look, hitters and baseball teams, but hitters especially, confidence is a funny thing. It comes and goes. It's like momentum. But a weekend like that, when you see what's happening on the field, and then you listen to what guys say in the clubhouse, De La Cruz after the Sunday game said, we're hot and we're going to stay hot. I heard Austin Wynns use the word again that we've heard previously this season of, we've got some nasty guys in here. And he wasn't talking about the pitching staff. He was talking about hitters who attack and hitters who are capable of some of the games that we saw recently or some of the games that we saw in Baltimore. And so if nothing else, when you're talking about what an identity or something gained from that series, whether it's short-lived or not, it's a boost. It's some juice that a team that offensively had been down some to start this season, you get that juice and you can ride it for varying lengths of time, but you'll take that all day because, as they say, I don't mean to be cliche here, but, it's contagious. And when guys start to feel good about their at-bats and feel good about scoring runs, it's contagious. And at times that can carry a team when you start to feel yourself that way.
What I did for my newsletter was I wrote this after the game yesterday, but I looked at the stats entering Sunday because like Sunday will kind of be its own aberration. We're probably never, there's nothing you can do to build off that. But Saturday, coming off Saturday, I looked at where everyone was at. Friedel, Fraley, Lux, their OPSs were between like 7.4 and 7.8. They've all had seasons better than that. Like you could certainly see those guys ending up there around that level over the course of the season. All right, maybe Austin Hayes won't be as unbelievable. He's not going to post like a 211 OPS plus like he has, but I think they think Hayes will be one of their best hitters. McLean and Ellie, they've actually been more cold than hot recently. Steer and Candelario, they've been two of the worst hitters in baseball, and at the very least, they're not that. And I think Steer especially is about to get going pretty soon. And Candelario did exactly that last year. So, they've got to start trending in the right direction. I think this is an offense that, again, more signs than not point to what the Reds have done over the last 2 weeks, not being an aberration, not being unsustainable, being more like who they are. And then, of course, 24 runs doesn't hurt either.
All right, let's keep that going. That was kind of the leadoff spot, but let's jump into Charlie's notebook. Charlie's notebook, I take it, returned successfully from Baltimore over the weekend with a few more additions and maybe a little more wear and tear, but it travels well, right?
I think this specific notebook is on its last week or two.
All right, well, keep us posted. Keep us posted. But going back to how things come and go, on Sunday and after a couple of other games this season, you can hear the caution in Terry Francona's voice at times after games like Sunday or earlier. And you can look back, pull up the schedule. The Reds scored 14 runs against Texas. And then the next 3 games after the 14-run game, that was the 3-1-0 shutout games. It can happen. They scored 11 runs against Milwaukee. The next 3 games, they scored a total of 5 runs. It happens. Baseball can be fluky, but in terms of positioning yourself as well as you can to sustain offensive momentum and good at bats and all of those good things we just talked about happened in Baltimore, what do you see as the difference maybe in the Reds offense recently? Some of the things you just talked about, but they were reinforced with some of the conversations you had about this group as a whole and where they're headed.
Yeah, I interviewed Nick Krall on Friday. I also interviewed Chris Valaika on Friday, the Reds hitting coach. And that was kind of, again, before the explosion. But the reason we're going to play this sound is how predictive it was. So, like, Ellie got a first pitch, I believe, curveball that he had that big home run on Friday night. And McClain and Candelario both homered on mistake pitches that they were specifically looking for. And on Saturday, 10 hits, definitely an aggressive approach. And then Sunday, I mean, they came out with the game plan to swing the bat early in counts against the Orioles starter who they bounced early. So we're going to hear back from Chris Valaika on Friday about where things stood. He was honest, critical, and again, I think kind of predictive too about the adjustments and the aggressiveness that this offense was about to start playing more with. Here's Chris Valaika on what he was seeing entering the Orioles series.
The elephant in the room. We need to do better on the fastball. I think that's something that, from the messaging from spring training, I think the guys have really taken to heart with the situation of hitting, but also just controlling the strike zone. And I think that has shown, overall or big picture with that. I do think, it's made us a little bit in between. So I think we can tap into, some more of the exit velocities that we had that we really haven't like yet. I think that just comes from, anticipating and settling into the season.
Doing that, is it kind of different for each guy, or is there a general message to make that happen?
I think that's more, overarching and global for the whole group. I'd like to see, Ellie continue to be aggressive, early in the counts. I think he's done a really good job controlling the strike zone and taking, a lot of the walks that he has taken. I think there's guys like Candy, who else? McClain. I think there's just definitely guys that we can be more aggressive earlier in the counts, the pitches we want to handle, rather than having to fight out of an at bat and falling behind 1-0.
You guys are doing fine in terms of strikeouts, but like you kind of alluded to, soft contact. How do you balance? You don't want to do either, but how do you balance?
There's the trade-off, right? If you're going to look for more damage, you have to be ready for the concession of more swing and miss or more chase. I think as a profile, that's been kind of who these guys have been in the past. So I think it's not going to be just something that you snap your fingers and overnight it changes. I think we're going to keep evolving, and I think we're in that space right now where they're trying to control their zone. Maybe it's made us a little behind on the fastball, or leading to some of that weaker contact. So I think as starts stabilizing, they feel more comfortable. Trusting their eyes if that we'll see more of that K-cost hit. I think we know we can do.
So, and here's where the Nick Krall and the Chris Valaika soundbites kind of work together. Nick Krall, don't want to call it a bird's eye view, but he looks at it from a definitely a macro view about, all right, what style of team is this going to be? Well, Chris Valaika, obviously, literally in the trenches, in the hitting bunkers with these guys. Sometimes you can skew too far into avoiding strikeouts, into making contact, but that's just being soft contact. And while the Reds certainly, want to make contact, want to avoid strikeouts, maybe it had specifically with the guys he mentioned, Ellie, McClain, Candy, skewed a little too far in that direction. And then literally those three guys, about a couple hours after that interview with Valaika, I believe they all homered on Friday night, and then a big series for everyone as a whole in Baltimore. But you can see those two things working together, right? This is the type of offense you want it to look like in the big picture, but then day to day, and as Valaika said, it takes time considering how much swing and miss and kind of aggressive power was a part of what maybe, the previous regime was stretching. You're starting to see that align more top to bottom.
And I'm glad you said that, because I was about to ask you that very question. You've been around Valaika and the hitters at this point in the season more than I have. What is the difference? What is the difference maybe in some of the things you just mentioned in philosophy that Valaika would bring? And also, what's the vibe? Valaika, he's, what's his personality? And how does it mesh with the Reds hitters from what you've seen so far?
He's a cool background because, of course, he's a former player. And I really like Joel McKeithen, the Reds' old hitting coach. Joel McKeithen was a driveline data science guy almost. Valaika is a former player, but he's also, what's the word? From an initiatives and from a curriculum standpoint, he's been very forward facing and has been recognized around the league and kind of around baseball by players for developing curriculum to teach specific things using technology and applying technology to drills. So that's kind of been a theme with him. He ties back to kind of Terry Francona's old school situational hitting approach as well. While the vibe that I got in previous years was almost at bats as individual entities. Stringing together more this year has been a massive focus. And again, that's what's interesting. They've avoided strikeouts. They've made contact. They've done situational hitting. It's just can't do any of that unless you're on base more and you're making more quality contact. So recognizing where each of these individual guys were at. Right, they made specific adjustments to be ready on the fastball, and that was applied in pregame and postgame and all kind of stuff. And then you saw a big series, and I thought that was pretty cool.
All right, you made note of your time in Baltimore over the weekend, and of everyone you've talked to over the weekend, you've made note that from an interview perspective, the highlight of the weekend for you was having a conversation with Jake Fraley. Now, Jake Fraley, we talked about earlier in the year, and we talked about going from last year to this year, kind of what he was looking for, the feel, the timing, whatever he was trying to find. You can tell what he was searching for has started to show up, from the grand slam in the Seattle series that felt like it was going to turn that game. Then the 429-foot shot onto Utah Street in Baltimore. We've seen more swings like that. We've seen more hard contact like that. How has that impacted Fraley between the years? As he, we know that he's a deep thinker. We know that he's someone who spends a lot of time in his own head. How is he working through that process, and what was that conversation you had with him like?
It's just really cool to see him in this place, because all right, when he was, and it looked really bad, specifically, coming off that Milwaukee series, you started to wonder if the Reds would not option Fraley, but look in a different direction for their regular starting lineup. Terry Francona stuck with Jake, and that made a specific impression with him. And Jake now has gotten out of it by hitting for more power than he has since 2023. Let's go through the Jake Fraley story real quick. Jake Fraley through July of 2023 in that season was one of the 15 best platoon players in baseball. His OPS against right-handed pitching was up there with the best hitters in the game. Then he broke his toe. He came back. He couldn't move. It was I take out that month of September after he came back and tried to play with a broken toe. Then in 2024, following an off season while he was rehabbing a broken toe, he couldn't train like normal. His daughter's sick. He's got everything weighing on him off the field. He told me multiple times last year, I just can't get my roots under me. Like I just, he went on the family medical emergency list. And Spencer Steer kind of put this really well about Jake Fraley. He said he started slow this year, but this is what he does. He's a good hitter. He had a great 2023. I expect him to return to that form. Talking about what Fraley experienced last year, Steer said, it's not easy what he had to deal with. Some people forget that we're humans too. We have stuff going on away from the field. We have families to take care of. Sometimes it's just not easy. I can't say enough about what I think of Jake as a person. Jake had, from an off season, or from a family perspective, a normal off season again. It did, he had the slow start to 2024. It almost doesn't or 25 doesn't even matter now because his stats have fully rebounded. But now he has the roots under him. He's tapping into the power. He's looking like 2023 Jake Fraley, and you can just feel he called it euphoria, that there is just to be yourself again after everything he went through to get to this point.
We know certainly what Jake Fraley is capable of, and it is a good reminder that the human element of the game, you spend a lot of time at the ballpark, you spend a lot of time in the clubhouse, but that's not the only place you live. There's a lot going on at home as well. And I think, Jake Fraley's had a lot of fans since he's been here, even before fully understanding, and probably still not fully understanding, his family situation. But certainly I think most of the news recently that we've heard, at least, has been good about that. And that's always great to see, and good to see him continue to move forward. I think a lot of people are surprised Noelvi Marte is here. Certainly the injury to Christian Encarnacion Strand was the big factor there. But give me an update on Marte in terms of how he's handled this maybe unexpected opportunity, and maybe something you observed in Baltimore with Marte.
So first, I'll answer the first thing you alluded to. I asked Nick Krall what made Marte the guy. Marte was a very early cut from spring training, basically playing with the minor leaguers. They said he worked hard. They said he looked in shape. They said he applied some specific adjustments that the staff worked with him on. And frankly, they needed an infielder, and they felt comfortable with how he looked. And he's not going to play every day, but he's going to get some solid run, kind of like he has been doing, 2 out of 4 days, maybe 3 out of 5, something like that. And he has looked better, specifically. Like, the best version of Marte as a hitter does two things. He hits the ball to the opposite field, and he finishes his swing in a specific way. So I'm watching Marte on Saturday in batting practice, and it's whatever. And Mike Napoli is standing, the Reds' new assistant coach, former All-Star, standing right behind the cage with hitting coach Chris Valaika, and then Nick Krall's there, kind of just observing as well. And coming on, it's a very collaborative staff coming on, and Mike Napoli specifically, part of his role is working with the hitters. Coming off the round, Mike Napoli, and I'm going to kind of show this on YouTube, Napoli is putting his arms, you can't tell, so I'm going to rotate, is putting his arms here. So his arms are past his front shoulder. He's showing a low follow through. Marte, when he's not swinging well, when he's swinging and missing it at sliders, has a high follow through. So he goes to Noelvi with his arms locked in that low follow through position. He goes to Noelvi and he talks to him about it, and he keeps his arm locked in this position the whole time. And Valaika is like, yeah, like this is good stuff. And Nick Krall's just observing this whole thing. He's smiling like this is what coaching's all about. This is awesome. Marte goes, he works on that, he focuses on that. Marte comes back after batting practice. Yeah, and Marte's sticking his arms out with the low follow through. Marte then goes off on Sunday. And I know it was off a position play. After the Grand Slam, I look at the Reds dugout to watch the celebration. And Mike Napoli is walking around with his arms in that low follow through. And again, that's what coaching's all about right there. You know, you put a staff together, you put a player on the staff who can relate to these guys and incorporate a message in a specific way. I'm sure that Mike Napoli is not the first guy who's told Noelvi about the low follow through making a huge impact for him, but to celebrate it in that way, to see Napoli's investment in that way, to see how Marte responded to it, how Nick Krall kind of observed and was smiling and appreciating what was going on. To me, that was a pretty cool that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
And that goes back to, now we should note, everybody knows, the Grand Slam came off a position player.
I said that, yes, but it was still a good moment.
It's still, but I love the coaching moment. Right. The coaching moment is fantastic, and I love making observations like that. And it does go back to, it doesn't matter that it was a position player. He had success. He felt it. That he left the field that day feeling better than when he got there. And for guys, especially young guys, like I said, confidence is a weird thing, and it can come in different ways, and that moves him forward, hopefully, as he continues to go. But I love the Valaika story, and maybe seeing that connection, and just observing that pregame, and then watching it pay off in the game. No one can get Austin Hayes out. That's been a fun story. You have expectations for a player, and then you have a player that gets off to a ridiculously fast start. When you have a player like Hayes going back to the team that drafted him, the team that developed him, the team where he played on 3 teams that lost at least 108 games, and then also played on a team that won more than 100 games. When he got traded, he was the longest tenured player in that Baltimore clubhouse. He had been at the very bottom. He had been at the very top. He got the tribute video when he got back to Camden Yards, which kind of felt like a hockey thing. They do that a lot in hockey, but I didn't see it as much in baseball. When you walk back into that situation and your season is just starting, there are no guarantees you're going to have a good day, much less a fantastic weekend and a great series, which Austin Hayes had. From the moment I laid eyes on Austin Hayes, I love the way it looks and feels. I love the no batting gloves. I love the short pants and the high socks and the emotion. And when we were told that adding Austin Hayes to the lineup would be a big add for the Reds, you can think about that. But now that you see it, and now that we think about where it could potentially go, what about Austin Hayes?
This has been a very emotional week for Austin Hayes. Remember, his first hit as a Red the other day on Tuesday, the RBI. He pounds his chest as he runs to first base.
Yes, sir.
He homers later in that game, and he roars. Then he goes to Baltimore, and he does what he does in Baltimore. And I mean, look at the Austin Hayes journey. Traded by the team that he wanted, that he was as embedded in as anyone can be within an organization. Traded, kidney infection. Doesn't feel like himself, drained, all that stuff that was going on that you know about, has to sign a 1-year deal for first gets non-tendered by Philadelphia, then has to sign the 1-year prove-it deal, which no one wants to sign. And he signs with the Reds team that frankly wasn't guaranteeing him everyday playing time. He was going to be competing for a spot in the lineup. He was going to make the team, but maybe he would have ended up in the Blake Dunn role. Who knows how it could have turned out when you signed him originally back in January. So then to see these moments, it was an emotional Austin Hayes, and I talked to him about that. He said, anytime we're with a new team, you just want to establish yourself. And I feel good. I feel like myself. It was a long road to recovery. Imagine how finally being back on the field feels for him. And he said this too. He called his wife, or he talked to his wife a few days into spring training, and he said, I think we picked the right place. Because he said, you don't really know. There were a bunch of teams interested in him. You have to sit down, look at the dynamic of the team, who's on the team, where they're playing, try to make the best decision you can for your career. Because his career was kind of at an inflection point. When you sign a 1-year prove-it deal and don't hit, look at where these things go. And Austin Hayes is an indispensable piece of a Reds team that needs more power. We heard from Nick Krall earlier talking about what Hayes' return does to the entire lineup. Kid can play. I mean, he's blown away my expectations. I've said this before on the show about him. Francona likes to be measured, with what he says to the media in terms of he's not going to heap praise or when it's not earned or needed. He's praised Austin Hayes more than anyone on the team. And again, this kid can play. This guy, he's a veteran, can play. And, the Reds' best position player signing in a few years.
You brought up Terry Francona. So let's get to Tito's top 2, which is, if you're joining the show for the first time, there's so much to glean from conversations and observations about the Reds' new manager, things that he says or does. So we kind of separate it out in the show each week and kind of bring you a little bit of a best of or things that stood out to us. And for Francona, what we hear pregame and postgame, you hear a lot of honesty. You hear some straightforward observations or things or notes about his team. And I think you can sift through some of that. And sometimes I wonder, is the message, does it sound the same in the clubhouse? Is it really that simple? Something that he says to us that here's what I think about these guys. Does it come across in the same way in the clubhouse? What did you get from Francona recently that ties into the conversation maybe we had about Jake Fraley and where Jake Fraley has been and where he is now?
So the thing we've heard Francona say the most is, as cold as guys get, they get just as hot. And when the lineup was poor, it was patience, patience, patience. I asked about changing up the lineup, and he said it's too early to change up the lineup. And I mean, he's done this. He knows what he believes in, and so now let's get to Fraley. He was talking about how through the conversations he's had with Francona, and then talked to people, in general around baseball who've been out of the game, who've been not playing specifically for just a few years, not 30 or 40 years, or I forget how long Terry Francona, I guess he retired at the end of the 80s, early 90s. Here's what Fraley said about Francona. If you're out there doing your thing, he lets you ride it out. He lets you have the at-bats because he understands how tough the game is. Fraley said that's walked away from sometimes. He said, when he's talked to a lot of guys around the league about this, when you're removed from playing, you forget how tough the game is. And basically you see coaches forget how tough the game is. Francona's patience made a huge impression on this clubhouse with the way he stuck with guys like Fraley, the way I know Candy's been in and out of the lineup a bit more, but they've got 10 guys they want to play. Sticking with Candelario. He hasn't, shaken up the lineup. He hasn't made that panic move with the Reds calling up someone from AAA to try to be the savior. Fraley said he does a really good job of staying in that place and understanding how tough this is for us. And that helps him be able to say the right things and make the right decisions. Like, that has created a buy-in and this is what they think of Francona. This is what Francona has shown them that he's going to, that there's a trust, a patience, a recognition, an appreciation, and an understanding that, all right, these are the guys the Reds have invested in, go. Instead of doubting that. And as Fraley alluded to, around the game, you can see a lot of doubt when things don't work out. And I would say doubt is one of Francona, the Francona is the opposite of doubt. Francona is completely self-assured, or not self-assured, but assured and confident in what he believes in. And again, let me stress, that is what this Reds clubhouse has learned about Terry Francona.
Pre-game in Baltimore, again, as you're watching batting practice, and you've had the story about Valaika and Noel V. Marte. I just asked you about Valaika and his philosophy, what he does. What else did you learn and observe about maybe how they go about some of that pregame work? Because this is kind of fascinating to me too, because you think about the last however many years, or at each stop a player's been along the way in the minor leagues or whatever. Everybody does kind of their own thing at times, but what are the things that everybody does, and how are they organized, and how are they structured, and what do you do at this point in the week or before the game? What did you observe with what Valaika likes to do or was doing at least this weekend in Baltimore?
Well, it's been all season. It's been kind of something that's been stewing around my brain for a while, how different pregame workouts have looked. And every coach has a different way of doing it. The Reds' previous staff, there were a lot of variables in their pregame work, and you would see a lot change. And it was very specific based on making adjustments to this or that. And that was fine. We can debate the effectiveness of the 2019 to 2024 Reds another day. What I'm seeing now is remarkable consistency. And again, Francona, assured, confident, knows what he believes in and wants it to look like. They do early work around like 2:30, where players hit off the machine if they want to. They can go out and face that velocity machine. Everything else, your whole traditional pregame workout, all, for lack of a better term, by hand. All of the normal batting practice session is pitching. Like I said, they might do a bit of machine work as the season progresses, but all the on the field stuff is live arms. They don't do what they did. They previously did a lot of machine ground balls and fly balls, specifically ground balls. Their infielders would be off to the side with the previous staff working on glove positioning and hand placement. Now they just go out and field grounders. And, one guy fields it at, Candy fields it at third, and then Lex goes in behind him. We've all done these drills, and they're working on things, balls to your left, balls to your right. But it's in that kind of old school style way. They used to have a lot of specific equipment for pregame workouts. Well, now they're using gloves, bats, and balls. And I think that's obviously coming from the top and applied through the coaching staff. I think that's a pretty cool kind of difference in what this coaching staff is and what it believes in, just when you look at pregame workouts.
Let's play baseball. Gloves, bats, and balls. Get right into those tools. I love it.
I could just hop right in. I did these drills.
Yeah, you could just hop right in for sure. I'd love to see that. Reds got this long road trip. This is one of the longest road trips of the season. 3 cities, 9 games, 10 days. They got it off to a good start, obviously, in Baltimore with the series win. Coming into the week, they've won 8 of 12. Next stop is down the East Coast to Miami to face the Marlins. And let's get a quick thought on this series. The Marlins have struggled to start the season. They just lost 5 straight and then broke that on Sunday with a win in their final game before the Reds hit town. Pitching in the series, you'll have Lodolo, hopefully with the dad strength game in his first time out since coming back from being away from the team for that little family celebration. You get Nick Martinez pitching in his hometown. Nick Martinez needs a game, and you said last week, and I agree with you, maybe this is the one, or this is the place where that could happen. And then Brady Singer. So quick thought on what you alluded to previously of a winnable stretch for the Reds. You got to kind of make hay when the sun shines, right?
No, I like Xavier Edwards. Matt Mervis having a nice season. Stowers, interesting skill set. Their center fielder, kind of toolsy, but we'll see what happens there. I'm trying to say nice things, but this Marlins team's pretty terrible. This Marlins team is noticeably worse than the 2022 Reds, and so are the Rockies, who the Reds are facing, over the weekend. The Marlins, I believe, are like one of the youngest teams we've seen in a long time in terms of it's a bunch of guys who just haven't played, and most of them weren't top prospects either. Their goals are to try to refill their farm system on the back end, and that doesn't quite help your major league team. The Reds needed help offensively during the offseason, and the Marlins were one of 3 teams that was willing to sell, and they didn't trade anybody because there wasn't much interest around the league for their players. So that's the Marlins. The Rockies we'll get to later in the week, but spoiler alert, you can make the case that 2 of their 3 best hitters are Kyle Farmer and Nick Martini. So very, very winnable stretch here for the Reds. Nice to see. What really has to happen too is the pitching kind of has to get back on schedule after the bullpen kind of got taxed over the last week.
Right. Going to see Sandy Alcantara but he's had a little bit of a tough start, but certainly when you get closer to the trade deadline, Sandy Alcantara's name is going to continue to come up if he stays healthy. But that's the first part of this week for the Reds as they hit town with some serious momentum after the Baltimore series. Please tell a friend, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, watch us on YouTube, and we'll be back to talk about the Miami series and set up the rest of the road trip. But for now, for Chaz, I'm Geese. For our producer, Kent Garrison, thanks for watching the show. For listening to Power Stacks, we'll see you next time.